I can be attracted to somebody's swagger, like the way that they move their hips. I could be attracted to the way somebody sounds, the way they talk, or the way they moan, or the way they smell, right?
Hello, my name's Kay Anderson, and this is Lost Spaces, the show that is all about lost queer spaces. Only, it's not really about that at all. It is about the memories of the people who drank there and danced there and fell in love there. Every week I talk to a different person and I find out what relationship they had with a particular queer space and how it shaped the person that they've become. So this week we are doing something a little bit different. Rather than visit a lost space, we are setting out to answer the question, is the ancient art of cruising about to be lost? And there's no half-stepping here. You know what I'm like. I'm super dramatic, and so I have asked a fairly dramatic question. But there are a number of factors like hookup apps and the over-gentrification of our cities that I think do threaten these discreet little woodlands and private beaches from being used for their intended purpose of people meeting and copping off with one another. Anyway, to help me answer this question, I am joined by Marcus McCann, who is the writer of the book Park Cruising: What Happens When We Wander Off the Path. And, you know, after writing a whole book about cruising, I think maybe he's a bit of an authority on the subject and he's got a thing or two to tell us. So if you have ever wanted tips on how to improve your cruising skills, if you've wanted to know what the biggest lessons that come when you master the art of cruising, or if you just were interested in the impact that the pandemic has had on people's propensity for going out into nature, then I think this might be the episode for you. Let's get into it.
I sometimes think about the kind of theory of abjection, which is the version of it that I like to think about is the drag queen who has found the most uncomfortable button-down young gay person in the audience to just torture for a little while. Like somebody wearing like a polo shirt, and she goes up to them and puts the microphone in their face and is like, "Are you a top or a bottom? Do you like big dicks? What's your favorite kind of porn? What kind of underwear are you wearing? Who in this bar would you want to fuck tonight?" We've all watched that happen, right? And it's sort of uncomfortable. So basically what the drag queen is doing is like rooting out unacknowledged shame and is saying, like, the message is essentially like, get over yourself, right? And also the like reverse of that is that we have the most to learn from those that we think are beneath us, right? Get over yourself. There's no one who is above the indignity of sex. And that's the confrontation that I had to have before I could really be in my body about sexuality and about cruising. I think you do see this among queer people at venues where there is cruising or sex on premises. You can sometimes suss out people who haven't really done that work of internalizing their identity, who still have some of that unacknowledged shame, and who are maybe not able to relax into this space.
So do you go up to them and ask them if they're a top or a bottom and what kind of underwear they're wearing in order to overcome that?
Well, right. I mean, I will say after the spotlight is off that interaction, when the next drag queen is on the stage doing the number, you'll often see that drag queen put her arm around the young queer person, buy him a shot, say something encouraging, make sure that he knows that he's welcome, that he is part of the community, that this wasn't done in a way, because it wasn't done in a way to be hurtful. It was actually done in a way to be helpful. But no, I mean, I think if you're in a cruising space, you have to acknowledge the headspace of wherever people are at. I've certainly been in spaces where there are people who are having some kind of reaction, and you just give them space. Or you might go up and talk to them and just be nice, not in a sex way, but just in a like friendly, helpful neighborhood queer kind of way.
Okay, so we talked about this getting used to the flirting and the cruising in a bar, but we haven't talked about cruising and being cruised and consummating the cruise. Is that how you would refer to it? Would you consummate the cruise?
It sounds a bit like analytical, but no, I'm into it. Yeah, okay.
So tell me about your first time consummating the cruise.
Yeah, I wonder if I can even... it was definitely at Hanlon's Point. So I know Toronto's not known for its wonderful weather, but in the summer it can get up to like 35 and 40 degrees Celsius. It is quite warm in the summer. Mm-hmm. And it's right on Lake Ontario. And there's a little island. You take a ferry to this island, and that's where Hanlon's Point is. Hanlon's Point is like historically queer. It's the site of the first gay pride picnic in Toronto before there was a march. And there's like just a strip of beach, and then behind that, a strip of bushes, trees, and low ground cover, kind of a dune type situation. And it depends on when in the week you go. On the weekend, it is just hopping. People bring boomboxes and stereos and Bluetooth speakers and electric margarita machines. Yeah, oh yeah. They bring iced coffee. They bring party drugs. People are there all day, and they have a hoot, right?
Was sunscreen on that list?
Because it is clothing optional. So. Although a lot of queer people who go wear these like impossibly small, slutty bathing suits. That's just to paint you a picture. On weekdays, it tends to be quieter. There's less of the like party music. People are there relaxing with books in small groups. They might bring a picnic, that kind of thing. In both scenarios, in the bushes, people walk through these paths in the bushes where they're visually obstructed from both the inside of the island and the beach. And that's where cruising tends to happen. And so I remember my first times cruising there, where you would just sort of wander up and down these paths, looking at someone, watching them, watching you, right? And yeah, that's where my first cruising encounter, my first consummated encounter.
So taking a step back, how did you find out that it was a cruising spot? Like, was it just by happenstance, or was that just someone told you, or it was the known thing, so of course you knew?
I mean, I love that question because queer people are so ingenious about how information is spread, right? For me, I mostly found out from jokes. So people would say something that was sort of catty and flirty that would involve the idea of sex in the bushes. And from there, I was eventually able to construct this picture of, oh, that's what's happening there, right? The kind of like older queer people on the beach, when you would come out of the bushes, either because you had just arrived, so you were like arriving through the bushes, or you just gone in there to piss and you're coming back out. These like older queer people would like look over their shoulder and be like, oh, look at you, you're coming out of there with dirty knees, or like, they just like make jokes.
To what, like to like an 18-year-old?
To anybody. And so, yeah, I think part of my education about what happened there was through these kinds of like it is information being relayed, even if it's being done through a joke. And yeah, I mean, also older queer people telling me about their experiences of cruising in parks, including at Hanlon's. And you can see, once you know what to look for, you can see that it's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Well, and so in these times when you were experimenting with cruising in those first few times at Hanlon's Point, was it that you were just going there because you were going to enjoy the beach, and whilst you were there, may as well have a look around, see what's there? Or were you going with the intention of, I'm going to get dirty knees today?
I think for a lot of people who cruise, there's like a kind of combination, right? Like you go thinking you might have sex.
Is this just, you're lying to yourself, you mean?
No, I mean, I think it's...
You say like, oh, I'm just going for the beach.
Or what I would say, I mean, with cruising, it's like anything. It's like going on Grindr. You're like, oh, I'm going on Grindr to meet somebody to have sex with. Does that mean you are actually going to meet someone to have sex with on Grindr that day? Yes or no. You're making yourself available to it, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, right?
Okay.
And so I think a lot of my early cruising was I would go to the beach and I'd bring a book, I'd bring a couple of cans of beer, and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to have a great afternoon no matter what happens. And yeah, sure, I'm going to, like when I have to take a piss, I'm going to go into the bushes and I might be there for 3 minutes, or I might linger, walk up and down the paths, see what I can see. You can leave the possibilities open. Mm-hmm. I think one of the lessons of cruising is this maintaining a light touch, that you can sort of manifest that this is what your desire is, but the world will cooperate or it won't, you know? That, and that's okay. That actually sometimes the sexy titillation, will there be something to do or won't there be? Will I find a man there in the bushes or won't I? Sometimes that is the pleasure, right? Consummating is a pleasure, but the thrill of the like adventure, the uncertainty, the maybe is also one of those thrills.
I think I have the wrong personality for it, to be honest. And this is the same with going out to bars and being like, I'm on the pool tonight, I'm going to like go home with someone. Because if I've told myself that, like if I go to a cruising place or if I go to a bar with the intention of picking someone up, that's it. I'm so single-minded and so like focused on that. And I think that's where I fail, because it's like, I just need something. I just need some kind of recognition or affirmation from someone,
see
anyone.
Me. Yeah. Will someone please see me? Well, I mean, I also think like the circuits at Hanlon's are a good example of this, where people don't go to a space and then just cruise for 2 hours straight. Mm-hmm. They will go and sit on the beach and go for a swim, and then they might cruise in the bushes for some amount of time and then come back. You could go for a little walk 4 or 5 times over the course of the afternoon.
Yeah.
So you're doing both.
Yeah. But I think where I fall down is when I'm in the water or when I'm sitting reading a book, I'm distracted because I'm thinking about getting up and walking around. Like, what if someone's there now? What if someone perfect has just shown up? I need to be there. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, the moments when you're on the beach or engaged in other activities, for some people, their antenna's still up to some degree, right? They are monitoring the beach to see who's going into the bushes so that they can be like, oh, that guy's cute. He just went into the bushes. Or like a common version is that you will like make eyes with somebody on the beach in a larger social group. You know, 2 groups over, there'll be somebody and you just notice him noticing you, and back and forth. You make that circuit, and then you'll like go and stand beside the entrance to the bushes and just wait to catch his eye. And then you go into the bushes. So you're like not leaving a lot to chance.
So painful.
In that moment. What do you mean so painful? What's the source of the pain?
Oh, just like I am so committed, right? Like I'm not going to be subtle at all in any of this. So I'll be like, you need to look at me. I am here. Now you are following me. And yeah, I'm just cringing at myself for being so committed.
I think it's good to be committed, but also to some extent, one of the lessons of cruising is this idea that your attachment isn't to an individual particular sexual partner, but to the whole kind of milieu or the community. And so you can't be too caught up in being like, that's the guy that I want to suck that guy's dick or whatever. You have to instead be like,
he's one of several. Yeah.
That's one possibility, right? You sometimes see a version of this kind of preening in bathhouse culture where everyone's like trying to find the one perfect person for them, like the one person that they're most attracted to in the whole establishment. Whereas when the circuits are working properly, it's more of a kind of yes and okay, yeah, okay, I could just fool around with you, and then when someone else comes around, I could fool around with him too, and so on, right?
So it's a bit like improv.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is improvisational. And I also think, if you think about Grindr, it has this like illusion of infinite choice. And so it encourages you to be very specific about your sexual preferences.
Yeah.
I am looking for somebody who has this sexual position, who looks this way, who has these particular...
Preferably on the next street, yeah.
That's right, within 500 meters. Whereas in a cruising scenario, you're limited, you're sort of cued in by who's present, right?
Yeah.
And so it encourages people to engage in activities that they might not have engaged in if they were limiting themselves through Grindr. I also think, I mean, on Grindr, you're mostly looking at people's photographs, which is very visual.
Yeah.
Whereas in cruising, I can be attracted to somebody's swagger, like the way that they move their hips. I could be attracted to the way somebody sounds, the way they talk, or the way they moan, or the way they smell, right? All kinds of things that are not available to you.
But crucially, their proximity.
Yeah. Even closer than 500 meters. That's right.
So I'm aware, I don't think that we actually got to the bottom of this first cruising expedition. We know where it is, and then I think we went off topic.
I wonder, so like, I don't have like a really super firm memory of like what the first guy that I fooled around with in the beaches looked like. But I wonder if that's in part because these encounters are intended to be fleeting. They're intended not to leave a mark, really. And so I can tell you about that first summer. I can tell you the kinds of activities that I would say, for example, in that park, oral sex is a lot more common than anal sex. There would have been examples of kind of mutual masturbation, group masturbation, right? Like 6, 7, 10 guys together in one little kind of cul-de-sac at the end of a path. And those were all very exciting to me at the time. I think people's relationship to cruising can sometimes be a bit cyclical too. People have periods of greater or less interest in it. The same way that, people are on Grindr, right? Like I'll be on Grindr every day for 4 weeks, and then I won't be on Grindr for 2 months, and then I'll be on it every day for a couple of more weeks, right?
And sometimes I like bran flakes, and sometimes I like muesli. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's minus 20 out.
That shouldn't be a barrier.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
How determined you are.
Definitely people do cruise in the winter. I'm a fair weather cruiser. The same way I'm a fair weather cyclist. When it's like under 10 degrees, I'm like, no, thank you.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
My estimation of you just went down. Okay, so you don't remember the first instance, but paint the picture a bit more for me here. In cruising, or in particular in cruising in this first summer, are you the aggressor or are you the opposite of the aggressor? Are you the one waiting? What's the opposite of aggressor?
Like the more active or passive, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Are you the initiator or the... Oh, I don't know what the opposite of initiator is. But yes, what you said.
Yeah, I guess I would struggle to characterize it either way because it requires a kind of reciprocity. There are definitely times when I got lured, when somebody was the one standing at the edge of the bushes being like, nodding their head to come this way. And there are definitely times when I was the one standing at the edge of the bushes. Or like once you're in these like cruising paths, it's pretty clear the reason that you're there. And so it's just a matter of like, in order to turn that flirtation, that spark of interest into an activity usually requires one or the other of the two finding, leading the other into some more private part of the bushes. And so I've definitely been the one who led there and the one who followed, for sure.
Love a verse cruiser. And so Talk to me about the feelings of that first summer, like when you got home from those cruising expeditions. What does it feel like?
In writing about cruising, there is sometimes a strain of kind of ecstatic, utopian, self-obliterating, like that kind of feeling. And that's never what I felt. The things that I felt were more like comfortable, steady, like sex was not a problem or so scarce or something I needed to worry about.
So it's like a reassurance that it's out there.
Yeah. Here's a first. It was my first time at Cherry Beach, which is, how do I describe this place? It's at the end of a kind of industrial park, past a garbage dump. And then there's this kind of like ratty set of trees off of, it's called Regatta Road in Toronto.
Wait, and this place is called Cherry Beach.
There is a beach area, but the cruising area is off of Regatta Road in this forest. Okay. And the forest is like just kind of this scrubby little Ontario forest that no one would go to for any reason, really. There's not really like hiking trails through it. And there's not really, it's difficult to get to because it's on the other side of this sort of industrial area. And I went down there because I had heard that this was an awesome place to cruise. And there's like a kind of bike path before the forest. And I like biked up and down and I could see, like, it was not clear at all which part of this forest was the cruising part. And so like after a while, I just got off my bike and like pushed it into the forest and was like, well, let's see what happens, And I just like chilling out on a log basically beside my bike. And I saw like there was a guy and I don't know, maybe question mark, there's some just like middle-aged guy in a polo shirt. And then the second guy I saw was wearing basketball shorts, no shirt, and a leather chest harness. And I was like, aha, I have correctly identified the location, Yeah, and so then I started wandering around this forest. And that first time, I must have seen 40 or 50 men. It just like on a Thursday afternoon in August. Mostly, just doing what you do in cruising, which is like you wander around, you look, you see what's available, whatever. And this guy just sort of appeared out of the woods. He was ostensibly a jogger. Like he was wearing running shoes and little running shorts.
He looked the part at least, yeah.
Yeah. No shirt. Like we passed each other. And then I turned around to see if he was like looking over his shoulder at me. And he had stopped and was sort of like jogging in place. And so like we then went to try to find somewhere quieter to engage in some sexual activities. And
one or two.
Yeah, right. But it was so busy that it was like impossible to find somewhere private. And I don't know, like I don't mind if there are people watching. And it may be that he didn't mind either, but he thought that I minded, you can't always tell. And so we eventually just sort of gave up. And he was like, do you want me to show you around here? And he did. And it was like huge. It was much larger than I thought the cruising area was. And in the middle of it was this kind of like tall, willowy grass, like 10 feet tall, that they had cruisers had carved paths into. It was like a corn maze for sex. So like the forested area and this like sex corn maze.
That sounds terrifying, honestly.
Oh,
what if you got lost?
I was really afraid of getting lost. For sure I was. And he's like, don't worry, I'll bring you back to your bike when we're done. And he did. And that was my first time at Cherry Beach, at Regatta Road.
But there was no consummation.
Well, there was some dick sucking and I ate his ass for a while. Like, it was okay. It was...
Yeah, sorry. I'm just so focused on the act of consummation. Sorry. You've taught me already that sometimes it's about the thrill, and that's what I need to focus on.
Yeah. And I would say there was some act, but not to completion, you know? Like nobody came.
It was an entree. Yeah.
But the like activities that we did engage in, making out, mutual masturbation, oral sex, and eating ass, like that's pleasing, even if it doesn't result in an orgasm.
Yes. Yes. And now have you taken on the role of wise sage showing around newbies, or did you just skip that bit?
I think it's part of our culture is the transmission of information, because you're not getting it usually from the traditional, from your parents or from more traditional means. It has to be shared in other ways.
And in this instance, thank goodness.
Right. Yeah, right. So I do think that, sure. And now with this book, it's so funny. Like part of it is people are saying to me, like the book isn't a manual. It's not a how-to. It's not like whatever. But like people have been saying to me, oh, I learned so much about this activity and how to do it from the book.
Aww.
And also people have been telling me these like just very sweet stories of their own cruising experiences. Like, it used to be important to me when I was in the closet. I don't do it all that much anymore, but it was really helped me to not see my past with shame to see your book. Or other people who are like, I met my husband in the parks, or, So, yeah, I do think that the stories we tell are important for transmitting that information to people who are newer at it.
And that brings me to one of the questions that I had for you. A few times throughout this conversation, you have talked about the lessons of cruising, the things you learn in cruising. Have you documented them in a list? And are there others that you want to impart?
Well, no, there's not a list. It's not like the 10 Commandments or something like that. But
it could be, right? We could make it a thing. Right?
We could make it a listicle. I suppose we could. I guess for me, the book project was about trying to answer this question about whether there was a kernel of the social good in cruising. Like people think of cruising as this kind of antisocial activity, that it is essentially something that people do that is offensive to your neighbors, that is you do it purely for your own personal pleasure, and that there's no sort of social or societal benefits for it. And so the project of the book was to say, well, what does cruising do? Like, what do those circuits, what do they teach people who are participants? How do they affect communities? How does cruising help with neighborhoods, with, one thing I was just talking to someone about recently was the idea that cruising can help lend municipal distinction to a place, that it can be a site of for tourism or for, this is part of what makes this a distinctive and interesting area. And it is used that way all over the world. This isn't in the book. I was thinking this is like maybe a shadow essay that didn't get written. But like if you go on gay travel sites and you're like, what is there to do in whatever city, in Mexico City, in Athens, whatever, in any city, one of the things that will come up over and over again is what parks to go cruising, or what beaches to go cruising.
But so what's the lesson for you? What are the lessons that we need to share with listeners? And also, actually, whilst you're pondering that, does there need to be lessons?
Right. I mean, that's a fair question. What is it about queer pleasure that requires justification, right? We don't need justification. And yet, I think we lose something if we're unable to articulate the sort of full 360 of what the effect of the activity is. For me, the chief benefit of cruising is that it requires you to think about what other people are thinking and feeling. The essential element of cruising is what we've been talking about, this sort of circuit. You're paying attention for signs of mutual interest before engaging in a sexual activity. Now, this is a really low bar, right? But it's not something that straight men are really taught to look for signs of interest before engaging in a sexual activity with someone.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm laughing at that.
There's a kind of version of searching for sex that is kind of, you're going to plow over other people's thoughts and feelings to get to the thing that you want. Mm-hmm. And so this like attentiveness that is required in order to cruise is essentially empathy. And empathy is a skill that people can use in all aspects of their daily life. It is something that makes you a better doctor, it makes you a better lawyer, it makes you a better night watchman, like in whatever your career is. It makes you a better partner or father or son, Empathy is sometimes in short supply. So I think that is the first and most important lesson of cruising. It is a kind of version of a consent culture that has real lessons that can teach participants and by extension everybody a better way to be.
And you also get to hang out in nature, which I think is important.
Nature's healing, yeah.
And so thinking about the theme of this show, which is lost spaces, do you think that cruising will become extinct?
No, I don't think that. But individual cruising venues are constantly under threat. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because in order for cruising to take place, it has to be kind of underused, under-policed. Yeah. It usually takes place in areas of the city that have fallen into disrepair in some way. Mm-hmm. So if you think about, for example, the docks in New York in the 1970s, which were sites of terrific sexual exploration for people at night, that was only possible because they were kind of semi-abandoned, that these warehouses and piers were not places that were busy at night or actually busy at all at any time. And so it allowed homeless people, trans people, sex workers, people who are cruising to have a site where they could engage in that kind of exploration. And that as development took over, as the piers were sold off and turned into giant condo buildings, for example, cruising was no longer possible there. And so you can see that, like, on the one hand, any individual cruising space is perpetually at risk, especially as we have like rising commercial real estate processes. We have the like erosion of public spaces in cities that like spaces that were formerly public are being privatized, like even like a little parquet that used to be a public space, they'll put in a cafe and the city will lease out the cafe. And then now you can't go there unless you're buying a coffee, right? Mm-hmm. So that like the erosion of those public spaces puts cruising in jeopardy. But the flip side of that story is that we are an ingenious bunch, and you can't stamp it out. That when it gets too hot in one spot, people just move, and they don't move too far usually.
But so then, what's the future of cruising?
The future of cruising is for all of us to write. But I will say, in terms of public spaces, that we need to fight to preserve public spaces, to preserve spaces that are a little bit unruly, to use Matthew Gandy's term, these spaces that allow for
no one
activities.
else would want to go to.
Yeah, totally. Hanlan's, for example, the problem right now is beach erosion. And as a result of beach erosion, the middle part of the beach has basically gone at the moment. And it means that people have to go through the bushes to get from the north end of the beach to the south end of the beach. Because of that, it puts more non-cruisers in the cruising space, creating a conflict of use and the risk of unwitting confrontation. So, it's not inevitable that that governments should use park planning to eradicate cruising. They can also use it to support cruising. And so in the case of Hanlan's, for example, we need beach infill to fill in that part of the beach that's disappeared. And we need, in my view, I think that they should be widening the bushes area, planting more bushes, making more visual obstruction between the areas where non-cruisers are and cruisers for the protection of both.
And so what are your thoughts in relation to the rise of the apps and people using apps to look for sex? Do you think that that sits hand in hand with cruising, or do you think that they're very different things?
You see people on the apps in a bathhouse these days. Like someone will be sitting, on the bench in the locker room.
Because they are committed. They are like desperate for the day.
I don't know what it is. I think for some people, it's a way of asking for what you want without having to say it out loud.
Yeah.
And that's great for people who want that. I think most in-person cruising areas now have some degree of hybridity. Like technology is still there. And I don't have a view that that is positive or negative. It just is. It is part of the experience. But I do think that it will never fully replace the experience of meeting somebody, a stranger, in person, whether that's in a bar or in a park, because the pleasures that are available that way are different pleasures, overlapping, right? Like the sex act is something that you can get at from either source, but some of the pleasures are only available if you're open to meeting people in person.
Yeah. I guess the reason I ask the question is because when I think about in the olden days, when cruising was more of a necessity, maybe it's never been a necessity, but when there were no alternatives to cruising, people took to cruising because that was the only thing that they could do. But now that there are the apps and websites where you can procure sex in different ways, there might be people that just never ever see the need to go and cruise. And so is it just going to die out?
Yeah, I mean, people have had alternatives to in-person cruising for a long time. Like, for example, starting in the 1950s, people were posting sex ads in the gay newspapers. And it didn't stop people from cruising.
Yeah, but that was not as immediate as the options that you have now.
True. Yeah, that's true. But if people didn't want to engage in that. In terms of like park cruising, people have been saying, oh, now that gay bars aren't getting shut down by the cops all the time, now that gay bars are available, people shouldn't be cruising in the parks or on the streets anymore. And again, the existence of that as an alternative hasn't stopped people from cruising on the street and in parks. So I think that is instructive. I don't know. I don't have statistics on this, right? But my sense is that during COVID, park cruising had a bit of a resurgence. And I think there might be more than one reason for that, more than one factor. So one of them obviously is that in the first couple of years of COVID, when we were afraid about being indoors, poor ventilation, that kind of thing, there was like a kind of socially responsible social distancing circle jerk kind of available to people. And even encounters where there was more direct sexual activity, it was still outside where there was air circulating and so on. So it was kind of a safer sex strategy during COVID. That's one thing. I also think about the ways that we learned danger and risk coming of age before heart and combination therapies. The generation that's coming of age now doesn't have the same relationship to HIV that we did. And so I think that may also allow people to be more open about their sexuality in a different way than we had available to us when we were growing up. Oh, one other thing also. At least in Toronto, I think this is true in London, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because residential rents are so high and spaces at such a premium, young people are living 3 people in a 1-bedroom condo, and it's like one person lives in the breakfast nook and one person lives in the living room and one person lives in the 1-bedroom. And so like the idea that people have access to private space in order to engage in sexual activity, it's never been less true in a way. But like the realities of the residential real estate market mean that people are looking for places outside of their homes to have sex because they actually don't have privacy in their houses.
Yeah. Why don't we just have love hotels like in Tokyo?
It sounds like, maybe there's a business model there.
That's my next business venture.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a great idea.
Okay. So you think cruising's here to stay? Long live cruising.
Yeah. Rumors of the death of cruising are greatly exaggerated. And of course it's going to grow and change. But like, we have examples of cruising from 15th century Florence and, 18th century London. And Walt Whitman was cruising in New York in the 19th century. Like, it's been around a long, long time.
Yes. Yeah. As long as we have hormones, as long as they're not eroding because of our sedentary lifestyles. Well, then that's a possibility, right?
The essential ingredient is actually just strangers.
Oh no, but now we live in a super connected world where no one is a stranger.
Or the opposite, where nobody knows anybody and even your next door neighbor is utterly strange to you.
Oh, that's quite glib. Oh.
But luckily, there's a way to get past that, and it's park cruising.
If you enjoyed hearing about Marcus's thoughts on cruising and you want to find out more, then make sure you check out his book, Park Cruising: What Happens When We Wander Off the Path. I will make sure that there is a link in the show notes to this episode where you can grab yourself a copy. And full disclosure, if you buy using any of the links that I provide, I will get a small commission. So thank you in advance. And if you happen to have any stories about cruising, or maybe you've not gone cruising and you have stories about flirting in clubs or bars or other queer spaces, then I want to hear all about it. So why not get in touch? My plan, as you know, is to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing. But I can't do that without your stories. So go to lostspacesPodcast.com, find the section Share a Lost Space, and then tell me all about what it is you got up to. If you are not quite ready to go all the way and tell me the whole story, why not just get in touch on social media? You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod. And whilst you've got social media cranked up and running, just go with me on this. Whilst you've got it up and running, why not find Marcus on Instagram, where he is MMCCNN, and he is also the same username on X, MMCCNN. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you took the time to subscribe, leave a review in your podcast platform, or, just tell other people who you know who might be interested. I think it makes a huge difference to this show when word of mouth is used. My name is Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.